The ice started falling from the power lines at 5 in the morning, and by 6:30, I was staring at a maple tree branch the size of a sedan crushing my neighbor's fence and threatening the transformer on the pole near my driveway. I'm Carson Edwards, and I've been working as an emergency contractor for Northern Ohio Electric Company for 3 years now. When winter storms hit Cleveland suburbs like ours in Westlake, I'm one of the guys they call to clear hazards before the power grid turns into a death trap. My phone buzzed with the automated alert from the power company at 6:45. Ice storm damage reported in my zone. Standard protocol. Assess, document, clear hazards near power infrastructure. I grabbed my gear, threw on my high-visibility vest with the power company logo, and fired up my commercial-grade chainsaw. The still roared to life in the freezing air, exhaust puffing white in the dawn light. I was maybe 10 minutes into cutting back the branch that was literally wrapped around the transformer housing when I heard the screaming. "What do you think you're doing?" I killed the chainsaw and turned around. Standing at the edge of my driveway was Patricia Caldwell, president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. She was maybe 55, with that specific haircut that seems mandatory for HOA board members, wearing a puffy jacket that probably cost more than my chainsaw. Her face was already red, and not from the cold. "Morning, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice level. "Just clearing the ice damage before someone gets hurt. You cannot operate power tools before 9 a.m. on weekdays," she snapped, marching closer. "It's in the HOA bylaws, Section 7, Paragraph 3. Noise ordinances." I gestured at the branch. "This is literally touching a live transformer. If that branch shifts wrong, the whole street loses power. Probably catches fire too. I'm contracted by the power company." "I don't care if you're contracted by God himself," Patricia said, pulling out her phone. "The rules apply to everyone. That's the whole point of a homeowners association." "Patricia, this is emergency work. The power company sent me the alert 40 minutes ago." She wasn't listening. Her fingers were already dancing across her phone screen, that particular expression of righteous fury settling over her features. "We'll see what the authorities have to say about this." I stared at her. "Are you seriously calling the cops because I'm preventing a power outage?" "I'm calling 911 to report illegal power tool usage during restricted hours," she said primly. "The law is the law." I should have argued more. I should have shown her my contractor ID, the work order on my phone, something. Instead, I just shook my head and went back to work. The branch wasn't going to cut itself, and every minute it stayed wrapped around that transformer was another minute of risk. I fired up the chainsaw again, drowning out whatever else Patricia was yelling. The branch was a tricky piece of work. Ice had formed around the power lines, weighing them down until the maple had practically embraced the transformer like a lover. I had to be surgical about it, cutting away sections piece by piece, making sure nothing pulled on the lines as it fell. This was exactly why the power company contracted specialists. One wrong cut, and I could bring down the whole pole. I was halfway through the second major section when the police cruiser pulled up. Officer Rodriguez stepped out, a guy I actually recognized from the local coffee shop. He looked at me, looked at Patricia, who was standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, and sighed in a way that suggested this wasn't his first HOA rodeo. "Morning, Carson," he said, walking up my driveway. "Got a call about illegal chainsaw usage." I pointed at the transformer. "Emergency work order from Northern Ohio Electric. That branch came down in the ice storm overnight." Rodriguez looked up at the mess of wood and ice and power lines. "Yeah, that looks pretty serious." "It's not about how serious it is," Patricia interjected, hurrying over. It's about following community rules. We have noise restrictions for a reason. People are trying to sleep. Madam, I understand, Rodriguez said, in that careful tone cops use when they're trying not to laugh. But emergency utility work is generally exempt from noise ordinances. It's a public safety issue. Patricia's face was getting redder. Are you telling me the HOA regulations don't matter? I'm telling you that state and federal regulations supersede HOA rules when it comes to utility infrastructure, Rodriguez explained. He looked at me. You got your contractor ID on you. I pulled out my wallet and handed him the laminated card that identified me as an authorized emergency contractor for Northern Ohio Electric, complete with photo and authorization codes. He examined it, took a picture with his phone, and handed it back. Yeah, he's legit, Rodriguez said to Patricia. He's actually required to respond to these alerts. If he didn't show up and that transformer went out, the power company could fine him. This is absolutely unacceptable, Patricia said. I'm going to file a formal complaint with the city. That's your right, madam, Rodriguez said. But Mr. Edwards here isn't breaking any laws. Have a good morning. He nodded at me and walked back to his cruiser. Patricia stood there for a long moment, visibly shaking with anger. This isn't over, she finally said. Not by a long shot. She stalked back to her house, which was 3 doors down from mine, and I went back to work. The whole interaction had cost me maybe 15 minutes, and the ice on the remaining branches was starting to melt in the weak morning sun, which actually made the situation more dangerous. Melting ice meant shifting weight, meant increased risk of the branch falling in an uncontrolled way. I worked for another 40 minutes, carefully sectioning and removing the hazard. By 8:30, I had the whole mess cleared, the transformer housing checked for damage, and a full photo report uploaded to the power company's emergency system. No power outage, no injuries, no property damage beyond my neighbor's fence, which their homeowner's insurance would cover as an act of God. My phone rang as I was loading my gear back into my truck. It was Marcus Chen, my supervisor at Northern Ohio Electric. Hey Carson, got your report on the Westlake job, he said. Saw there was a police call. Yeah, HOA president called 911 because I was using a chainsaw before 9 a.m. Marcus laughed. Jesus, they get you sorted out. Officer recognized me, confirmed I was legit. Whole thing took about 15 minutes. Good. Listen, we're getting slammed with calls today. Ice is coming down all over the west side. You available for more runs? Yeah, send them my way. Great. Got one in Rocky River, another in Bay Village. Probably more coming. It's going to be a long day. He wasn't kidding. I spent the next 8 hours running from one ice damage call to another. Fallen branches, sagging power lines, a whole tree that had come down across a primary distribution line in Avon Lake. It was nearly 6 p.m. when I finally headed home, exhausted and covered in sawdust and ice melt. The envelope was taped to my front door. Official Maple Ridge HOA letterhead, my name printed in bold letters. I opened it standing right there on my porch. Notice of violation, it read. Violation of Maple Ridge HOA bylaws, Section 7, Paragraph 3, Noise Ordinances. Operating power tools before 9 o'clock a.m. on weekday. Fine, $250. Payment due within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in additional penalties and potential legal action. I read it twice, then pulled out my phone and called Derek Harrison, my next-door neighbor and one of the few reasonable people on the HOA board. Hey Carson, Derek answered. Let me guess. Patricia hit you with a fine, $250 for doing my actual job this morning. Derek groaned. Yeah, she called an emergency board meeting this afternoon. Wanted to make an example out of you for flagrant disregard of community standards. I voted against it, for the record. So did Tom. But Patricia has 3 votes locked up with her little coalition. Derek, I was doing emergency utility work. I'm legally required to respond to those calls. I know, man. I tried to explain that. Patricia doesn't care. She's been on a warpath lately about maintaining standards and not letting people think they're above the rules. What's her problem? Honestly, I think she's bored and power-hungry. Her kids are all grown and moved out. Her husband travels for work constantly. The HOA is the only thing she has where she feels important. That's not my problem, I said, feeling my temper rise. I'm not paying a fine for preventing a power outage. You might want to come to the next board meeting, explain your side formally. If you just ignore this, Patricia will escalate. When's the meeting? Thursday night, 7 p.m. at the community center. I'll be there. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday dealing with more ice storm aftermath. The whole Cleveland metro area had been hit hard, and emergency contractors were working overtime. I documented everything meticulously. Every work order, every photo, every timestamp. If Patricia wanted to play games, I was going to make sure I had ammunition. Thursday evening, I walked into the Maple Ridge Community Center at 6:55 p.m. The building was one of those generic suburban facilities, all beige carpet and fluorescent lights. The meeting room had maybe 30 chairs set up, and about 15 were occupied by neighbors. Patricia sat at a folding table at the front with 4 other board members. Derek, Tom Wu, a woman named Jennifer Stratton, and another guy whose name I could never remember. Patricia's eyes locked onto me as I entered. "Mr. Edwards, how nice of you to join us. Thought I'd clear up this misunderstanding," I said, taking a seat in the second row. "There's no misunderstanding," Patricia said crisply. "You violated HOA noise regulations. The violation stands." "We haven't gotten to that agenda item yet, Patricia," Derek interjected. "Can we at least follow proper meeting procedures?" Patricia's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Fine. Let's begin. Maple Ridge HOA Monthly Meeting, March 6, 2025. First order of business, approval of last month's minutes. The meeting dragged through the usual tedious HOA stuff. Budget discussions, approval of new mailbox designs, a debate about whether the community entrance sign needed repainting. I sat there getting progressively more irritated as precious minutes of my life ticked away on nonsense. Finally, after 45 minutes, Patricia cleared her throat. Next item, enforcement action against Carson Edwards for violation of noise ordinances. "I'd like to speak," I said, standing up. "You'll have an opportunity after the board presents the case," Patricia said. "The case?" "This isn't a court. HOA hearings follow quasi-judicial procedures," Patricia said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "We will present the evidence of violation, then you may respond." Derek caught my eye and shook his head slightly. I sat back down. Patricia launched into a detailed recitation of how she'd been awoken at 6:55 a.m. by chainsaw noise, how she'd witnessed me operating power tools in clear violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the bylaws, how she'd contacted authorities, and how the violation represented a breakdown in community standards. Furthermore, Patricia continued, Mr. Edwards' attitude when confronted showed a clear disregard for our community rules. He claimed to be doing emergency work, but offered no proof of this claim at the time. His subsequent continuation of the noise violation after being warned demonstrates willful disregard. "Are you done?" I asked. "You may present your defense," Patricia said, gesturing regally. I stood up and pulled out my phone. On March 4th, at 6:47 a.m., I received an automated emergency alert from Northern Ohio Electric Company. There was a tree branch threatening a transformer on the power line near my property. As a contracted emergency responder for the power company, I'm legally required to respond to these alerts within 2 hours. I documented everything with photos and filed a complete report. I started pulling up the photos on my phone, walking toward the front to show the board. This is what the branch looked like when I got there. You can see it's wrapped around the transformer housing. If that branch had shifted or fallen, it could have caused an explosion, a fire, or at minimum a prolonged power outage affecting at least 50 homes. Tom leaned forward to look at the images. Jesus, that's bad. Furthermore, I continued, emergency utility work is specifically exempted from local noise ordinances under Ohio Revised Code Section 4933.16. The power company's emergency contracts supersede local regulations when public safety is at risk. Officer Rodriguez confirmed this when Patricia called the police. The police response is irrelevant, Patricia said. We're discussing HOA violations, not criminal law. The HOA bylaws specifically state that they comply with all applicable local, state, and federal regulations, Derek said, pulling out his own copy of the bylaws. It's in the preamble. If state law exempts emergency utility work from noise restrictions, then the HOA bylaws can't supersede that. That's a matter of interpretation, Patricia shot back. No, it's really not, Tom said. He looked at me. Sorry about this, Carson. You were obviously doing your job. Motion to dismiss the violation. Second, Derek said immediately. This is highly irregular, Patricia protested. We haven't even deliberated. Patricia, he showed us his work order and cited the actual state law, Tom said. What's to deliberate? We can't fine someone for following state emergency response regulations. All in favor of dismissing the violation? Derek asked. 3 hands went up. Derek, Tom, and Jennifer. Opposed? Derek continued. Patricia's hand shot up along with the other guy whose name I still couldn't remember. Motion carries 3-2, Derek said. Violation dismissed. Patricia's face had gone from red to almost purple. This is an outrage. We cannot have people thinking they can just ignore community rules whenever they want. He didn't ignore anything, Tom said. He responded to an emergency. There's a difference. I'm noting my strong dissent in the minutes, Patricia said. Mr. Edwards, you may have won this particular battle, but I will be watching your property very closely from now on. Any actual violation will be prosecuted to the full extent of HOA authority. Looking forward to it, I said, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. I left the meeting thinking the whole thing was over. I should have known better. The first sign of trouble came a week later when I found another envelope on my door. This one wasn't a violation notice. It was a notice that Patricia had scheduled a property inspection of my home for the following Tuesday. I called Derek immediately. What the hell is a property inspection? It's in the bylaws, Derek said, sounding tired. The board can conduct random inspections to ensure properties are being maintained according to community standards, but they're supposed to be rare and scheduled with the homeowner's consent. Patricia's doing this to harass me. Almost certainly. But if you refuse the inspection, she can fine you for non-compliance. This is insane. Welcome to HOA life, man. Look, just let her do the inspection. Keep everything documented. If she tries to write you up for made-up violations, we'll fight it at the board level again. Tuesday afternoon, Patricia showed up at my door with another woman I didn't recognize, both carrying clipboards. Mr. Edwards, we're here for the scheduled property inspection, Patricia announced. This is harassment, I said. This is proper HOA governance, Patricia replied. May we proceed? I stepped aside. For the next hour, Patricia and her companion went through my house like forensic investigators. They measured the height of my grass. They examined my exterior paint for chips. They inspected my mailbox for signs of rust. They took photos of everything. In my garage, Patricia stopped and stared at my equipment setup. I had a workbench with my chainsaw, safety gear, and various tools neatly organized. Everything was clean and properly maintained. "You're running a business out of your home," Patricia said, and I could hear the triumph in her voice. "I'm storing my work equipment in my garage." Section 12, Paragraph 8 of the bylaws explicitly prohibits home-based businesses in residential properties. "I don't run a business from here. I'm a contractor. The power company sends me to job sites. Where do you store your equipment?" "In my garage. That's not a business. That's just where I keep my stuff." Patricia was already writing on her clipboard. "We'll let the board determine that." They spent another 30 minutes finding various minor issues: a slight crack in my driveway concrete, a gutter downspout that was improperly positioned, a fence panel that was showing signs of weathering. Every tiny imperfection carefully documented with photos and notes. When they finally left, I immediately started taking my own photos and notes. The crack in my driveway was maybe 3 inches long and barely visible. The gutter downspout was positioned exactly the same way it had been installed by the builder 12 years ago. The fence panel had normal wear consistent with being exposed to Ohio weather for over a decade. The violation notices arrived 4 days later. 7 separate violations, totaling $1,750 in fines. "She's lost her mind," I told Derek over beers that evening. "She's literally making stuff up now." "I'll be honest with you, Carson," Derek said. "Patricia's been getting worse over the past year. She's written up probably a dozen homeowners in the past 6 months alone. Most people just pay the fines because it's not worth the fight. What happens if I don't pay? The HOA can put a lien on your property. If the fines get high enough and you still don't pay, they can eventually force a sale to recover the debt." I stared at him. "That's legal?" "Unfortunately, yes. When you bought your house, you signed the HOA agreement. It's a legally binding contract. So Patricia can just manufacture violations until she forces me out of my own house?" "Theoretically, yes. But she has to go through the board, and Tom and I will fight her on obvious bullshit. You need to formally challenge these violations. Request a hearing. Bring evidence that her claims are baseless." I spent the weekend preparing for another board meeting. I researched every citation Patricia had made, took comprehensive photos of my property, and even paid for a professional property inspector to come out and write a report on the condition of my home. His conclusion: property shows normal wear consistent with age. All cited issues are cosmetic and do not represent violations of standard residential maintenance requirements. The hearing was scheduled for the next monthly board meeting, which meant I had to wait 3 more weeks. In that time, Patricia escalated. I got a notice that my garbage cans were visible from the street when trash day wasn't until the next morning. I got cited for parking my truck in my own driveway because it was commercial vehicle, even though it was just a regular F-150 with a toolbox. I got written up because my exterior light was allegedly too bright and constituting a nuisance. Every single citation came with a fine ranging from $100 to $500. "She's trying to bury you in paperwork and fees," Derek said when I showed him the latest round of notices. "This is getting out of hand. Can we call an emergency board meeting? Tom and I have been trying. We need 3 board members to agree, and Patricia's coalition won't do it. We're stuck waiting for the regular meeting." I decided to go on the offensive. I filed a formal complaint against Patricia with the city of Westlake, citing harassment and abuse of HOA authority. I contacted a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, and I started documenting every single interaction with Patricia or anyone associated with her. The attorney, a sharp woman named Michelle Grant, reviewed all my documentation and shook her head. "This is textbook HOA abuse," she said. "But here's the problem. HOAs have extremely broad authority under Ohio law. Unless we can prove she's acting in bad faith or violating the HOA's own governing documents, your options are limited. She's obviously acting in bad faith. This is retaliation. Probably, but we have to prove it. The fact that these violations started after you won the noise ordinance dispute helps. The quantity and nature of the citations helps, but Patricia can claim she's just enforcing rules that have been neglected. So what do I do? Fight every citation, make her prove each one. Document everything, and start looking for other homeowners she's targeted. If we can show a pattern of abuse, we might have grounds for a lawsuit against the HOA for failure to properly govern." I started reaching out to other neighbors. What I found shocked me. Patricia had been systematically targeting anyone who opposed her on the board or questioned her decisions. A couple 3 streets over had been hit with $3,000 in violations after they complained about how Patricia had spent HOA funds on expensive landscaping at the community entrance. An elderly man had been cited repeatedly for his lawn not being exactly 2.5 inches tall. A single mother had been fined because her kids' toys were visible from the street. Everyone was afraid. Most had just paid the fines and kept their heads down. But some were willing to talk off the record. "She runs the HOA like it's her personal kingdom," one neighbor told me. "If you cross her, she makes your life hell until you either fall in line or move away. Why don't people vote her out? She controls the votes. She's got 3 friends on the 5-person board who vote however she tells them, and she makes sure that anyone who runs against her gets buried in negative campaigning. Last year, someone tried to run for board on a reform platform. Patricia sent letters to every homeowner claiming the guy had unpaid violations and was trying to destroy property values. Complete lies, but by the time he could refute them, the election was over. The regular board meeting finally arrived. I showed up with Michelle Grant, my attorney, and a binder full of documentation. Patricia's face when she saw the attorney was priceless. "Mr. Edwards, HOA hearings don't require legal representation," Patricia said. "They don't prohibit it either," Michelle replied smoothly. "I'm here as an observer and advisor." The meeting proceeded through the usual tedious preliminaries. Then we got to the violations. Mr. Edwards faces multiple citations for failure to maintain his property according to community standards, Patricia began. "Objection," Michelle said. "What specific community standard?" Patricia blinked. "I'm sorry. Which specific section of the HOA bylaws establishes the standards my client allegedly violated? I've reviewed the governing documents. They contain very general language about maintaining properties, but no specific standards for driveway crack length, fence weathering appearance, or gutter downspout positioning." "These are common sense standards," Patricia said. "Common sense isn't legally enforceable," Michelle replied. "If you want to cite violations, you need specific written standards that homeowners can reference." Tom was looking through his own copy of the bylaws. "She's right, Patricia. We have language about maintaining properties in good condition but no actual specifications. The board determines what constitutes good condition on a case-by-case basis," Patricia insisted. "That's called arbitrary and capricious enforcement," Michelle said. It's grounds for dismissing all violations and potentially for homeowners to challenge the entire enforcement structure. Derek was trying not to smile. Maybe we should table these violations until we can develop clear, specific standards. Absolutely not, Patricia snapped. Mr. Edwards' property is clearly in violation. Of what? Tom asked. Michelle's right. We can't cite him for violating standards that don't exist in writing. The debate went on for 20 minutes. Patricia got increasingly agitated as it became clear she was losing. Finally, Jennifer, who usually voted with Patricia, spoke up. I think we need to dismiss these violations and work on clearer standards. This isn't fair to Carson or any homeowner. That broke the deadlock. 4 votes to 1, all 7 of my violations were dismissed. Patricia looked like she was going to have a stroke. This is unacceptable. You're all making a mockery of this board. No, we're following proper legal procedures, Derek said. Meeting adjourned. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. Patricia had lost twice now badly. Surely she'd back off. I was wrong. 2 days later, I found out Patricia had filed a lawsuit against me personally, claiming I was running an illegal business from my home and demanding $15,000 in damages to the community. She's completely off the rails, Michelle said when I forwarded her the lawsuit. This is frivolous. We'll get it dismissed. How long will that take? A few months, probably. But this is good news, actually. How is getting sued good news? Because now she's acting as an individual, not as the HOA. We can countersue for harassment and abuse of process. And we can use discovery to dig into all her HOA actions. If she's been misusing HOA funds or authority, we'll find it. Michelle filed our response and countersuit. In the meantime, I kept getting cited for increasingly absurd violations. My doormat was the wrong color. My house numbers were improperly sized. I received mail in a box that wasn't the approved style. Every citation included fines. Every fine I refused to pay. The total was approaching $5,000 by the time we got to the discovery phase of the lawsuit. Discovery was illuminating. Through subpoenas, Michelle got access to all the HOA's financial records and Patricia's emails as board president. What we found was damning. Patricia had been using HOA funds for personal expenses. Dinners with her friends charged as board meetings. A weekend trip to Columbus charged as HOA conference attendance that turned out to be a personal vacation. She'd paid her son's landscaping company 3 times the going rate for basic lawn maintenance at the community entrance. She'd authorized herself a $500 monthly stipend for her board duties, which wasn't in the bylaws at all. The total misappropriation was over $40,000 across 2 years. Even worse, the emails showed Patricia explicitly planning to target me and several other homeowners who had opposed her decisions. Make life difficult until they leave or shut up, she'd written to one of her board allies. Michelle filed an emergency motion with the court. The hearing was quick and brutal. The judge reviewed our evidence, listened to Patricia's attorney try to justify the expenses, and made his ruling. Miss Caldwell, you have clearly abused your position as HOA president. The evidence of misappropriation of funds is overwhelming. The evidence of targeted harassment of homeowners is concerning. I'm granting summary judgment on the harassment claims in Mr. Edwards' favor. As for the financial irregularities, I'm referring this matter to the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office for potential criminal charges. Patricia went white. Criminal charges. Embezzlement, Miss Caldwell. You took money that wasn't yours. That's theft. The judge dismissed Patricia's lawsuit against me, awarded me attorney's fees and damages for harassment, and ordered Patricia to immediately resign from the HOA board. But the story didn't end there. The Cuyahoga County prosecutor took the case seriously. The detective assigned to investigate found even more irregularities once he started digging. Patricia had been systematically inflating expenses and pocketing the difference for years. The total theft was over $80,000. She was arrested 3 weeks later. The arrest made the local news. Westlake HOA president charged with embezzlement, read the headline in the Plain Dealer. The story detailed her theft and harassment of homeowners. Several other neighbors came forward with their own stories of Patricia's abuse. The criminal case moved slowly, as these things do. Patricia hired an expensive defense attorney who tried to argue that HOA funds weren't technically public money, and therefore embezzlement charges didn't apply. The prosecutor argued that since Patricia was in a position of trust and had fiduciary responsibility to the homeowners, it absolutely did apply. Meanwhile, the HOA held an emergency election. Derek became the new president. Tom stayed on as treasurer. They recruited 3 new board members from among the homeowners Patricia had targeted, including the single mother who'd been fined over her kids' toys. The new board's first action was to review and dismiss dozens of frivolous violations Patricia had issued over the previous 2 years. The second action was to refund fines that had been improperly collected. The third was to completely rewrite the enforcement procedures to include clear standards, appeals processes, and safeguards against arbitrary enforcement. "We're trying to make this a reasonable HOA," Derek told me over beers one evening. "Focus on actual problems, not power trips. Good luck with that." "I'm serious. We're changing the bylaws to limit what the board can do without homeowner approval. We're implementing term limits. We're making the finances completely transparent with monthly reports available online. No more Patricia situations." Patricia's criminal trial happened in November of 2025. I attended some of the proceedings, watching from the gallery as the prosecutor laid out the evidence of her theft and abuse of authority. Patricia's attorney tried to portray her as a dedicated volunteer who had made some accounting errors, but the emails destroyed that defense. Jury deliberations took less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her in January of 2026. 3 years in prison, 5 years probation, and full restitution of the stolen funds plus penalties. The total came to over $120,000. "Miss Caldwell," the judge said during sentencing, "you were in a position of trust. Your neighbors relied on you to manage their community fairly and honestly. Instead, you stole from them and used your authority to harass anyone who questioned you. This kind of abuse of power cannot be tolerated." Patricia cried during the sentencing. Her attorney asked for leniency, pointing out her previously clean record and her age. The judge wasn't moved. I ran into Patricia's husband, David, a few months later at the grocery store. He looked exhausted. "I'm sorry about everything she put you through," he said quietly. "I didn't know. I was traveling so much for work, I just wasn't paying attention to what she was doing. It's not your fault. I should have noticed. She was getting more and more obsessed with the HOA. It was all she talked about when I was home. I just thought she was bored and needed a hobby. I didn't realize she'd gone off the deep end." "Is she okay?" David shrugged. "As okay as you can be in prison, I guess. She still doesn't think she did anything wrong. Keeps saying she was just trying to maintain standards." The Maple Ridge HOA limped along through 2026, recovering from Patricia's reign. The new board was cautious and transparent. They actually listened to homeowners. Enforcement focused on real issues like safety hazards and major property neglect, not arbitrary aesthetic complaints. I kept working for Northern Ohio Electric, responding to emergency calls throughout the Cleveland area. Every time I fired up my chainsaw for a job, I thought about that morning in March when Patricia called the cops on me for doing my job. If she'd just been reasonable, if she'd just listened, none of the rest would have happened. But she couldn't be reasonable. She'd needed to be right, to be in control, to punish anyone who challenged her authority. And that need had destroyed her life. Michelle Grant, my attorney, ended up representing 3 other homeowners in lawsuits against their HOAs for similar abuse. "Your case opened a lot of eyes," she told me. "People are realizing they don't have to just accept being bullied by HOA boards." The local news did a follow-up story in the spring of 2027. HOA reform movement grows after Westlake embezzlement case. Read the headline. The reporter interviewed Derek about the changes at Maple Ridge, interviewed me about my experience, and talked to several state legislators who were considering new laws to regulate HOA authority and protect homeowners. "We're trying to strike a balance," one state senator explained in the article. HOAs serve a legitimate purpose in maintaining communities, but they need oversight and accountability, just like any other organization with power over people's homes and lives. I don't know if anything will actually change at the state level. Government moves slowly, and HOA reform isn't exactly a hot-button political issue. But at least in Maple Ridge, things are better. The irony is that Patricia's actions probably strengthened our community in the long run. The new board's transparency and fairness improved relationships among neighbors. People actually came to HOA meetings now, engaged in decisions, volunteered for committees. The community felt more like an actual community, not a dictatorship. I still live in my house on Maple Ridge Drive. I still respond to emergency calls from Northern Ohio Electric. And I keep all my contractor documentation meticulously organized, just in case. Old habits die hard. Every March 4th, I look at that transformer near my driveway and remember that morning with the ice storm. The morning that set everything in motion. The morning Patricia Caldwell decided to call 911 on a contractor clearing ice because she valued rules over reason. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if she'd just let me do my job, if she'd said good morning and gone back inside. If she'd been a reasonable person instead of a petty tyrant. But then I think about all the other homeowners she was tormenting, all the money she was stealing, all the abuse she was inflicting. Eventually, someone would have caught her. Eventually, her need for control would have pushed her too far. I'm just glad I was the one who pushed back. The final piece of the story came in June of 2027. Patricia was released early from prison for good behavior after serving 18 months of her 3-year sentence. She moved out of Ohio entirely, relocating to Arizona to live with her daughter. David sold their house on Maple Ridge. A young couple with a baby bought it, excited about the neighborhood and completely oblivious to its recent drama. That felt appropriate somehow. New people, new energy, no baggage. I was doing some maintenance on my truck in the driveway when they moved in. The husband walked over to introduce himself. "Hi, I'm Michael," he said, shaking my hand. "This seems like a great neighborhood." "It is now," I said. "Now, long story." "Welcome to Maple Ridge." He laughed and headed back to help his wife unpack. I watched them for a moment, carrying boxes and setting up their life, completely unaware of the small war that had been fought on these quiet suburban streets. That evening, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. My phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Tree down in Lakewood, blocking a primary line. I finished my beer, grabbed my gear, and headed out. Just another day in the life of an emergency contractor. Just another chance to clear hazards, keep the power on, and maybe avoid getting the cops called on me for doing my job. The Maple Ridge HOA was still sending out its monthly newsletters, now written by Derek in a casual, friendly tone that was the complete opposite of Patricia's formal proclamations. The latest one had information about the summer block party, a reminder about pool hours, and a note about the new playground equipment being installed at the community center. Normal, boring HOA stuff, exactly as it should be. I never did find out what happened to the other board members who had enabled Patricia's behavior. Jennifer apologized publicly at a board meeting and resigned. The guy whose name I could never remember just quietly left the board and kept a low profile. They weren't criminally charged since they hadn't personally benefited from the theft, but their reputation in the neighborhood was permanently damaged. Derek told me that during the investigation, they'd claimed Patricia had manipulated them, told them she had authority to make certain financial decisions, convinced them that aggressive enforcement was necessary to maintain property values. Maybe that was true. Or maybe they were just cowards who went along with a bully because it was easier than standing up to her. Either way, they were gone now, replaced by people who actually cared about the community rather than power and control. The state legislature did eventually pass some HOA reforms, though not as comprehensive as advocates wanted. The new law required annual financial audits for HOAs over a certain size, established clear appeals processes for violations, and limited the fines boards could impose without homeowner votes. Small steps, but steps in the right direction. Michelle Grant told me she'd been contacted by homeowners from across Ohio and even other states, all dealing with similar HOA nightmares. "Your case set precedent," she said. "Courts are taking HOA abuse more seriously now." That felt good, knowing that standing up to Patricia had helped other people. But mostly, I was just glad it was over. My life returned to normal. Work calls from the power company, maintaining my house, occasionally grabbing beers with Derek or other neighbors. The drama and stress of 2025 faded into an unpleasant memory. But I never forgot the lessons. Documentation is everything. Stand up to bullies, even when it's difficult. And sometimes, the person calling 911 isn't reporting a crime, they're committing one. On cold mornings when I fire up my chainsaw to respond to emergency calls, I sometimes think about that dispatcher who had to take Patricia's call. I wonder what they thought, hearing a woman demand police response because someone was clearing ice from power lines. I imagine them rolling their eyes, making notes about another frivolous HOA complaint, dispatching a patrol car knowing the officer would find nothing illegal happening. Officer Rodriguez and I still see each other at the coffee shop sometimes. We joke about it now. "Remember when you got called out because I was doing my job?" I asked him one morning. He laughed. "Man, that was the most ridiculous call of that whole week. And we'd had someone call 911 because their neighbor's Christmas lights were still up in February. What did you think when you saw what I was doing? Honestly, I thought this lady has way too much time on her hands, but I've dealt with HOA people before. They get tunnel vision about rules. They forget that real life is more complicated than what's written in a handbook." She definitely had tunnel vision. "Yeah, well, she paid for it. How's your neighborhood now?" "Much better." "Boring, actually, which is perfect." "Boring is good," Rodriguez agreed. "Boring means people are just living their lives, not fighting wars over grass height and chainsaw hours." The seasons cycled through. Summer heat, fall colors, winter ice. Each ice storm, I waited for my phone to alert me to hazards. Each time, I responded quickly and professionally. And each time, nobody called the cops on me for doing my job. Small victories. The new HOA board even acknowledged my work officially, passing a resolution thanking me for my service to the community during emergencies. Derek presented it at a board meeting with an actual plaque. For Carson Edwards, in recognition of his dedicated emergency response work protecting our community's utility infrastructure, it read, I hung it in my garage, right above my workbench. A reminder that sometimes doing the right thing, even when people try to stop you, leads to good outcomes. Patricia never returned to Westlake. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she'd gotten a job in Arizona working retail, a far cry from her previous life as an HOA president with unchecked power. Her marriage to David apparently survived, though I couldn't imagine it was easy. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices, hurt people deliberately, stolen money that wasn't hers. The consequences were entirely of her own making, but I did feel a kind of sadness about the whole situation. All of that drama, all of that conflict, all of those lives disrupted, because one person couldn't handle having a little bit of authority without abusing it. It seemed like such a waste. The neighborhood kids played in yards without fear of HOA violations now. People painted their front doors different colors. Mailboxes showed personality and individual style. The community looked more lived in, more human, less like a sterile development trying to impress nobody in particular. Property values stayed strong, despite Patricia's former warnings that any relaxation of standards would cause them to plummet. Turns out people prefer buying into neighborhoods where HOAs are reasonable rather than tyrannical. Who knew? I eventually paid off the costs from the legal battle. Michelle's fees were substantial, though the final judgment had ordered Patricia to pay them. Getting money out of someone going to prison was difficult, and eventually I settled for partial payment just to close the books on the whole thing. It was worth every penny regardless. David actually ended up paying most of his ex-wife's restitution. They didn't divorce, surprisingly, but he sold assets and took out loans to cover what Patricia owed. It's my responsibility too, he told me when I ran into him during one of his trips back to Ohio to finalize affairs. I should have been paying attention. The ripple effects continued for years. Other HOA boards in the Westlake area reviewed their own procedures and made changes. The city started requiring annual reports from HOAs operating within city limits. A local news station did an investigative series on HOA abuses throughout Northeast Ohio. Patricia Caldwell's name became synonymous in our area with HOA overreach and corruption, not the legacy she'd probably wanted. I thought about writing this all down at the time, while it was happening, but I was too busy living through it. Now, years later, it feels like a story from another life. The kind of surreal suburban drama that you don't believe actually happens until it happens to you. The lesson, if there is one, is simple. Don't abuse power, because eventually someone will hold you accountable. And don't call 911 on a guy clearing ice from power lines, because you never know what chain of events you might set in motion. That morning in March 2025 started with ice falling and a transformer threatened. It ended with an arrest, a trial, prison time, and a complete transformation of how our HOA operated. All because Patricia Caldwell thought rules mattered more than reality. I still have that work order on my phone, saved in a special folder. March 4, 2025, 6:47 a.m. Emergency response to ice damage, Maple Ridge Drive, Westlake, Ohio. Threat to transformer. Contractor response required. It's my reminder that doing the right thing might bring trouble in the short term, but it's still the right thing to do. And sometimes, standing your ground against a bully doesn't just help you, it helps everyone. The Maple Ridge HOA exists still, properly run by Derek and his board of reasonable people. They enforce actual important rules and ignore petty nonsense. They manage the budget transparently and hold regular meetings where homeowners can voice concerns without fear of retaliation. It's everything an HOA should be, and everything Patricia's version wasn't. As for me, I'm still Carson Edwards, still clearing hazards from power lines, still living on Maple Ridge Drive. The transformer near my driveway is in good shape, upgraded actually during a utility improvement project in 2026. The maple tree that caused all the trouble that morning was trimmed back professionally, no longer a threat. Life is quiet now. Boring, even. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Sometimes on cold March mornings when ice forms on the power lines and my phone alerts me to hazards, I think about Patricia and wonder if she ever thinks about that morning. If she ever realizes that calling 911 on a contractor doing emergency work was the beginning of her downfall. Probably not. People like that rarely see their own role in their disasters. They blame everyone else, claim they were treated unfairly, insist they were just enforcing rules. But the rest of us know better. We were there. We saw what happened when petty power met real accountability. And we won't forget.